Renowned MMA star Conor McGregor has taken the stand in his sexual assault case, denying all of the allegations against him. We're going to break down some of the top moments from what happened in that courtroom overseas. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. A lot of tension in the High Court out in Ireland this week as MMA star Conor McGregor took the stand as he faces serious allegations brought by a woman named Nikita Hand because she is claiming that she was raped by the fighter in a hotel room back in December of 2018. Now, this civil case, this is a civil case, not a criminal case, this civil case has gripped the public. A lot of people talking about it because it's revealing explosive testimony on both sides. Now, unfortunately, there are no cameras in that courtroom, so we're going to do our best to explain what has been happening in that courtroom overseas nonetheless. But here's a little bit of background on the case. So we have Nikita Hand, who is a hairstylist. She brings this civil lawsuit against Conor McGregor and also another man named James Lawrence, claiming that they sexually assaulted her after a Christmas party, again, back in 2018. Nikita took the stand. She testified that she drank alcohol, she had taken cocaine at this holiday get-together at her job, and then shortly after, McGregor picks her and a friend up, takes them to a nearby hotel. Nikita's lawyer, John Gordon, said that Nikita and McGregor had known each other from being a part of the same friend group, and it was at the hotel where she said that the MMA fighter took off her clothes and raped her. Later on, she said Lawrence also sexually assaulted her. The thing about that one, though, is she actually didn't remember that happening at first. She claims that she had apparently only learned of that because Lawrence allegedly admitted to police that he had had sex with her that night. So it's a really interesting case. And by the way, speaking of police, they did investigate this. They looked into it, but ultimately, no criminal charges were brought against Conor McGregor. Reportedly, there was insufficient evidence for at least a criminal case. Now, we want to stay on top of this McGregor story for you as it develops. And for that, I got to call out our great sponsor, Upside, because they help make shows like this possible. And Upside's awesome if you don't know what it is. It's a free app that helps you get cash back when you buy gas and groceries and food. Upside gets you real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can then transfer right into your bank account. Look here, I used Upside to find a gas station, claimed an offer, pay with my credit card, follow the steps on the app, got cash back. Yep, and you can use Upside at all different kinds of places, restaurants, convenience stores. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen. And make sure to use our promo code SIDEBAR and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. So going back to the civil case, though, Conor McGregor has officially taken the stand to defend himself against these allegations. And we're going to take a closer look at some of the top moments from his testimony. So to help me break this down, I want to bring on criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, Safa Robinson-Ferrer. Thank you so much for coming on, Safa. Really appreciate it. You are not an Irish attorney. I am not an Irish attorney, but there are similarities in the law nonetheless. So thank you so much for coming on and appreciating you taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
So the first major highlight that I want to talk about from Conor McGregor's testimony is his insistence that this encounter between him and Nikita was completely consensual. And McGregor even testified that earlier on that day, Nikita had apparently sent him a message on Instagram. It was a photo where she was allegedly wearing what he referred to as a slightly provocative dress. And he also said that he had received a slew of messages from her asking him to meet her that night. So Safa, let's start there because I want your take on that. According to Nikita, she made it clear to McGregor that she was not interested in sex and that she was upfront with him that she had a boyfriend. This, though, looks like a different kind of a narrative, no?
Absolutely, Jesse. And when we look at evidence, we have to look at all of the evidence to complete the narrative in these cases. You know, Mr. McGregor is maintaining his innocence and that this was essentially a consensual activity between the two of them. And the questions that'll be raised are what transpired prior to that interaction and also what transpired after. Evidence that Ms. Hand provided, photos to Mr. McGregor in provocative dress or provocative attire is certainly a key piece of evidence that we're going to want to know, because what it shows to me in my mind as a defense attorney is that this wasn't just some random isolated incident. This was a buildup, a relationship that they had. There was comfortable communication between the two of them where they were in the same friend group. They would communicate via direct message, whether it was on social media or assuming that maybe they had texted before. And there was a plan for them at some point to get together and go to this hotel. Miss Hand had her friend that was there with her, who was also a witness, and I won't say a participant, but was also there allegedly at the hotel at that time as well. There was also, I believe, evidence that Mr. Lawrence, who was Mr. McGregor's friend, also was picked up and taken to that hotel as well. So we have 4 individuals who've headed to a hotel that, in a vehicle that was driven by allegedly Mr. McGregor. And so that shows that there was a plan at least to get to the hotel. There wasn't any indication that there was any foul activity at that point or a significant question as to whether or not there was going to be a risk of harm or anything like that.
And people could change their minds, right? Maybe she was interested and then not interested. People can change their minds. Now, here's the thing. When it came to that encounter, McGregor said, he testified that the two of them, they were kissing, and then they engaged in what he said was fully consensual sex. He said it was good-hearted, happy. As a matter of fact, one of the first things that he said on the stand regarding Nikita's testimony was, everything's a lie. It is a full-blown lie among many lies. And he also characterized their encounter as enthusiastic and even athletic. These are terms that he used. What are your thoughts on how he characterized that?
Very interesting. But I think that's important here because what I also found out was that there were allegations of some sort of physical altercation or abuse. I think that Miss Hand indicated that she had some injuries to the neck area, and that ultimately when she went to seek treatment, there were photos that were taken or something of that nature.
But that's the point, right? Was it non-consensual violent sex, or was it, rough sex, right? I mean, I hate to get graphic, but that's what we're talking about.
That's exactly what we're talking about here. And I've said this previously in other cases that, one of the things we have to be mindful of is not to criminalize sexual activity. Unless it's illegal, unless it's without consent, or unless it's with a child, we have to be mindful of that. And this appears to be a situation, and we do have witnesses that may have not been inside of the room, but could at least hear what was going on, that would indicate that it appeared to sound like a joyous occasion between the two.
Now, for anybody who knows Conor McGregor has been following his story, you might remember there's another important factor in all of this is that Conor McGregor has a partner, or he had a partner at the time, Dee Devlin, and the two had reportedly been together since 2008. McGregor's not denying that he essentially cheated with Nikita. Cheating's obviously not a crime, but Safa, I think that's going to hurt the jury's perception of him?
It could, but I don't think so. I think that we found that in cases like this with high profile individuals, men and women, but majority of the times men that have money, that have affluence, oftentimes they may have more than one partner. They may have a main partner, they may have additional partners, or they may engage in non-traditional sexual activities. So that's not really a surprise. I don't know, and I don't think that the jury is going to penalize him for that. Could leave a bad taste in some individuals' mouths, but we're not here to judge whether or not he's a good boyfriend.
Yeah. Now, after the encounter, McGregor also said that Nikita wasn't upset when he left the hotel. He confirmed this to her attorney, John Gordon, on cross-examination, saying there had been no signs of distress, fear, anything other than enjoyment, elations, and excitement. By the way, there was also surveillance footage that was shown to the jury where Nikita can arguably be seen apparently kissing McGregor's arm and hugging him. And just to add to this, the friend Nikita was with that night, Danielle Keeley, also testified during the trial, and her story seems to corroborate what McGregor said, because Keeley actually said that she was surprised to learn of the sexual assault, saying everything was fine and no one was in bad form. I didn't notice anything that happened. She also said Nikita asked her to delete messages off of her phone. Now, Nikita said that was because she was in fear of Conor McGregor and she didn't want this all coming out. Another interpretation would be she's not telling the truth and she's trying to delete evidence of this. What's your take?
Absolutely. Credibility is everything in cases like this. And not only do we have Miss Hand and her testimony, but we also have her friend who's a witness. You would think that as a friend of hers that this person may be biased towards providing testimony in favor of Miss Hand, but it appears here that she's given neutral testimony, and in fact testimony that more so corroborates the defense side. And there's allegations here that she asked her to get rid of evidence. Why is that? That's important to look at here. Again, each piece of evidence is key and important, and these allegations that she wanted her friend to, delete text messages and things of that nature really ruin her credibility. So it's going to be interesting here as this continues to unfold, but I think that's certainly a win for the defense.
It really is a he said, she said, because they're both taking the stand. Safa, Nikita painted what was really a nightmare, a very traumatic scene. She claimed that McGregor pinned her to a bed, choked her, raped her. He seemed to say it was athletic, she was excited, and Nikita even said during her testimony that she feared she was going to die in that moment, that she would never see her daughter again. So two competing narratives. She could very well not be telling the truth, very well. But for her to file this lawsuit, to take the stand, to have her name amplified for the world to see, how does a jury balance that? Two competing narratives, two different people taking the stand.
Absolutely. And the jury's going to have to take a lot of things to think about in this case. One of the things that I find interesting and that I think the jury will be paying attention to is if there's a motive on either party's part to be dishonest. And I think in this case, I believe Ms. Hand had a boyfriend at the time, and there was concerns about, a physical injury that she may have had, and her boyfriend seeing it. So that certainly would provide a motive to be dishonest if she cheated on her boyfriend, didn't want that information coming out, and so ultimately the narrative was created that this was a brutal sexual assault as opposed to a consensual act.
It's a very important point. Very, very good point. And look, but here's what we do know. We do know that some kind of potentially intimate interaction did take place that night between the two, because a DNA expert, Dr. Charlotte Murphy, testified that there were samples matching Conor McGregor's semen that were found on Nikita's playsuit and underwear that she was wearing on the night of this alleged incident. And I will say, Dr. Murphy stated that doesn't indicate the nature of what this could be, saying the presence or absence of semen does not indicate consent. Dr. Murphy did say that the straps on Nikita's playsuit, they were ripped off, or they were ripped. And that, again, kind of draws speculation about what was happening between the two of them. So what is your take on the DNA evidence, this kind of physical evidence, which, by the way, we don't always have in these alleged sexual assault cases?
Absolutely. Well, there's no dispute here that sexual activity occurred between Mr. McGregor and Ms. Hand. There's no dispute there. What is in dispute is whether or not it was consensual. And I don't think that there's enough evidence here to show that it wasn't consensual. We have evidence here the sexual activity sounded joyous and things of that nature, that it sounded like regular sex. According to a couple witnesses in this case, there was no screaming, there was no yelling for help. There was no, Ms. Hand allegedly did not run out of the room or try to retreat because she was in fear of her life. There was no evidence indicating that. And not to say that that absolves the importance of consent, but a lot of times we see a number of factors or a number of acts that weigh into how consensual was this, and the semen on the play suit and ripped off, lingerie is not indicative of non-consent.
Yeah.
It isn't indicative of consent either. So it's going to be really, interesting to see how the jury plays that.
Well, let me bring up this other highlight from McGregor's testimony. You mentioned it before, and it came from what he said about the apparent bruising on Nikita's body, because when he was asked about her injuries, McGregor denied hurting her, saying she didn't get those bruises from me, as far as I'm aware. And he said that her bruises were maybe from taking a swan dive into a bath while they were partying. McGregor's co-defendant, James Lawrence, also mentioned the bruising when he took the stand. And he said Nikita was only upset about one small bruise and what she was going to tell her boyfriend about it. Of course, this is important because earlier in the trial, there was a paramedic who treated Nikita, testified that she had not seen such bruising on a patient like that in a long time. And she went on to say that Nikita had a cut on her chin, bruising around her lower neck, as well as on her chest, her legs, her buttocks, her thighs. During the paramedic's testimony, the jury was shown a video of Nikita being treated where arguably, and I didn't see it myself, but her injuries reportedly could be seen. So Safa, now, were the injuries caused by her interaction with McGregor or Lawrence, or were they caused by her maybe taking a swan dive into a bathtub?
It is possible both ways. Here in the United States, those are what we call issues of fact that a jury is ultimately to determine. And it's very likely here that it could have been the injuries sustained from taking that swan dive, or it could have been likely that the injuries came from the sexual activity. And one of the things people don't realize oftentimes is that when you have physical injuries and bruising, they may not appear automatically. They usually don't start to appear to the next day to 3 days. And so depending on, when that swan dive took place, when that sexual activity took place, and when she ultimately seen these paramedics and was treated at the hospital, will really determine at what stage the bruising was. And hopefully the jury can take that and make a decision as to how she got those injuries.
Speaking about that, connecting to the bruising, so Nikita had testified that McGregor actually put her into a headlock when he allegedly sexually assaulted her. McGregor's denied that he never did that. And Nikita also claimed, he said, well, now you know how I felt in the octagon. That's what she says he claims he said, referring to the Ultimate Fighting Championship ring when he was beaten back in 2018. McGregor denies that, and McGregor reportedly said this on the stand in response. How could anyone believe that me, as a prideful person, would highlight my shortcomings? That's interesting, right? As if he wouldn't have done that or said that because he didn't want to be in a position to say, yeah, I lost. Yeah, I was put in a headlock. I thought that was interesting.
Very fair point, to be honest. Definitely a fair point. Again, it's going to be interesting. It's going to hinge on credibility here. Who is the jury going to believe? Oftentimes in cases of sexual abuse and sexual assault, it is a he said versus she said. And what the jury ultimately has to determine is who they're going to give more credibility to. And so in this particular case, as the facts have continued to roll in my legal opinion, the jury at this point in time is probably narrowing to the defense and giving more credibility to the defense in terms of the testimony and the way the evidence has come in. And the civil world is obviously different from the criminal world. In the criminal world, we deal with things of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And, criminally speaking, I can see why they didn't pursue charges because that certainly isn't present here. There's no probable cause.
I have to say, I got to give him credit for leaning into his, who he is, his personality. This is not something I would say. This is not something I would do. I thought I wonder if his attorney told him to do that, but it was smart because there was this still. This was another highlight. So this is a highlight from his testimony. It came under cross-examination, so he's being questioned by the other side. And this is when he admitted that he had cocaine in his car along with the alleged victim and another witness. And remember, the jury heard Nikita testify that she had taken cocaine with McGregor that night. And we talked about this on a previous episode of Sidebar about what role drugs and alcohol could have played into what Nikita alleged had happened that night. Safa, how significant is drug use?
That's going to be pretty significant here. I think with drug use, the key thing is it impairs a person's ability to act in a certain manner, to be cognizant of the things that are going on around them. And so that's going to be another factor that's going to be considered by the jury is, did the alleged cocaine use impair one's decision making? Did it impair the ability to consent and other things? So that's going to be really important here and how the jury determines that.
I mean, also you have to think, if he's describing this event with her as exciting, euphoric, playful, could the drugs have played into that? Assuming he took the drugs, could it play into it? And maybe he doesn't have a great recollection of what was happening. And what he thought was euphoric and great, maybe wasn't.
And that's certainly possible. I think if it's cocaine, then that's traditionally what we call an upper. And so it can create euphoric feelings, excitement, adrenaline, and all of those things. And maybe he may have misjudged what the situation was. But again, remember that we have two individuals on the other side of that door that are listening to what's going on. And their testimony was that it sounded like sex, normal traditional sex, or what they thought was traditional sex. And it didn't seem like there was any concern for any physical violence at all.
I want to ask you about this. I thought this was significant. McGregor's interview with police. And the jury heard him say in that interview, no comment to I think over 100 questions. And he said he did so under the advice of his lawyer because he was in a state of shock and fear, claiming, I would have loved to go to the top of the mountain with a microphone and shout from the hilltops, but because of the seriousness of the allegation, I went to my lawyer and I took their advice. And he went on to express that this was the first time he had ever experienced anything like this, saying, quote, I feel I was good as cooperative. I took their advice. I put myself in their hands. This is alien to me. It's the first time anything like that has ever happened to me in my life. That interview is from January 2019, where McGregor was seen attending the interview with his attorney. And he also handed over a prepared written statement, which I'll talk about in a second. But he replies no comment to about 150 questions even questions such as if he and Nikita Hand were from the same area in Dublin, and even to a question about how he and Nikita knew each other. Safa, would you advise him to not answer any questions, even what seems to be basic questions? And by the way, I did a quick research on this. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Ireland has the same rules as we do, that anything you say can be used against you. So would you advise him just to not admit or comment on anything?
Absolutely. He has a right to remain silent. He should use it. I would completely advise him not to make any statements. Anything that you say, down from the neighborhood that you were raised in to what you ate for lunch earlier in the day, can and will be used against you if the evidence is presented in a way that it could be that could be done. And I don't think people know the value of truly remaining silent. And if the government is going to allege something against you, then let them prove it. There's a burden of proof. That's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't need to put ourselves in the crosshairs. Let's see what they come with, and then we'll deal with that later. But we don't need to give them any more information to aid in their investigation, only to turn around and use it against us later.
Is it different from oral statements you give to the police versus written? Why do I say that? Because it's being reported that in a written statement that was prepared to police, he allegedly said that Nikita moaned with pleasure and that this is a long session of sex. Why is it typical there would be more details in a written statement rather than what you orally tell a police?
Well, the oral statements and the written statements are going to be treated the same by law enforcement, and they're treated the same in the world of evidence. However, what I think with written statements is oftentimes you have the time to sit and think about what you want to say instead of being put on the spot and orally having to respond. So I think that was also a strategic decision to say, I'm not going to respond orally, or I will continue to no comment or remain silent, but let me articulate what my position is or what I recall occurring in writing, and let me think about that and respond appropriately and comfortably in writing.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Safa, thank you so much for coming on and breaking it down with me. Really, really enjoyed it. Would love to have you come back on whenever you're free. We're going to continue to follow this Conor McGregor story. A little bit difficult because it's overseas and we don't have our own people in there, but we're basing it on the reporting, and there's some great reporting about what's happening inside that courtroom. Curious to see which way it shakes up, considering I think Irish law is very similar to what we have here. But Safa Robinson-Ferrer, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse. See you soon.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.